They gave me the worst land. It was worth everything. They say the desert doesn't lie. It just bakes the truth out of you until there's nothing left but bone and dust. I'm 50 years old, and I spent most of those years reading what the ground tells me. Water tables, aquifer depths, the way sand shifts when there's moisture underneath. My grandfather taught me that before I could drive. He used to say that fools build on sand, but wise men watch where the water flows. I was thinking about that when I stood at my father's funeral. The temperature that July afternoon hit 104 degrees. Not unusual for Nevada's high desert, but brutal if you're not used to it. The kind of heat that makes asphalt soft and turns car interiors into ovens. I wore my usual work clothes. Faded Wrangler jeans, a plain cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and boots that had seen more miles than most people's cars. Comfortable, breathable, the kind of outfit that doesn't fight the desert. My stepmother Lydia and her boys were a different story. Lydia stood under the funeral tent in a black designer dress that probably cost more than my truck payment. She kept dabbing her face with a handkerchief, but the sweat just kept coming. Her makeup ran in little rivers down her cheeks. She'd married my father 8 years ago, right after my mother passed. Trophy wife doesn't quite cover it. Lydia was 55, but spent enough on procedures and treatments to look 40 from a distance. Up close, in the harsh desert sun, the cracks showed. Her sons from her first marriage, Brad and Chad, stood on either side of her like bookends, both in their late 20s, both wearing those overpriced Patagonia vests that tech bros and finance guys love so much. You know the type, the kind who talk about passive income and crypto portfolios at dinner parties. The kind who've never changed their own oil, but have strong opinions about which luxury SUV has the best resale value. They were melting in those vests. Dark patches spread under their arms. Chad kept tugging at his collar, like it was strangling him. I stood about 20 feet away from them, outside the tent. The sun didn't bother me. When you spend your days in the field checking irrigation systems and testing soil moisture, you learn to move with the heat instead of against it. You learn that complaining about weather in the desert is like complaining about water being wet. It just is. Brad pulled out his phone halfway through the service, started recording, not the service itself, but his own face, sad face, somber expression, posted it right there while the pastor was still talking. I watched him check the likes. Twice. Chad did the same thing 5 minutes later. Different angle. Same performance. My father would have hated that. But my father had been too sick these last 2 years to fight back. Too tired. Too worn down by Lydia's constant presence, her suggestions, her helpful financial advice. She'd moved into that house like a slow-motion invasion, replacing his things with hers one piece at a time until nothing was left of the man I knew. The funeral ended. People filtered away to their air-conditioned cars. I stayed until the workers started filling in the grave. It felt right. Someone should watch. Lydia's voice cut through the heat shimmer. She wanted everyone back at the ranch for the will reading. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Right now. Strike while the iron's hot, I guess. Or while the grief's still fresh. Makes people easier to manage. The Silver Springs Ranch sat on 1,200 acres of high desert land. Prime real estate, even with the heat. My grandfather had built it from nothing back in the 20s, turned scrubland into something productive through sheer stubbornness and understanding of where water hides underground. My father inherited it, maintained it, loved it in his quiet way. Now, Lydia was about to carve it up. The main house was exactly what you'd expect from someone with more money than sense. Marble floors, imported Italian furniture, abstract art that looked like someone spilled paint and called it vision. The air conditioning hit me like a wall when I walked in, set to maybe 65 degrees. Wasteful, the kind of cold that costs hundreds a month in electricity bills just because you can. The library where they held the will reading was all dark wood and leather chairs. Looked like a movie set. My father never used this room. He preferred the back porch with his coffee and the sunrise. But Lydia had remodeled it 3 years ago, made it proper, made it hers. Brad and Chad had already helped themselves to the whiskey. Pappy Van Winkle, The kind of bourbon you wait 10 years to find, and they were mixing it with Diet Coke. They lounged in the leather chairs like they owned them, which I guess they figured they were about to. Lydia sat in the biggest chair, the throne. She'd changed into something more comfortable. White linen, still expensive. She'd fixed her makeup. She looked at me when I walked in like you'd look at a stain on your carpet. Unfortunate. Soon to be handled. The lawyer was a guy named Richard Pemberton. Slick back hair. Expensive suit. The kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. Friend of Lydia's from her country club. I'd met him twice. Dislike him both times. He had that way of talking down to people while pretending to be helpful. Patronizing. That's the word. He arranged his papers with excessive care. Made a show of it. The tension built. Theater. All of this was theater. Richard cleared his throat and started reading. Legal language. Whereas and heretofore and all that noise. Then he got to the meat of it. The Silver Springs Ranch. All 1,200 acres. The main house. The equipment barn. The new John Deere tractors. The irrigation systems. The water rights to Main Springs. And all bank accounts went to Lydia. Free and clear. Estimated value of $25 million. Maybe more with development potential. Brad and Chad were named as junior partners in the ranch's future development. Whatever that meant. Probably golf courses. Maybe luxury homes. Some stupid idea that would pave over everything my grandfather built. I got the north parcel. Richard said it like he was doing me a favor. 500 acres of what the old-timers called the Dust Bowl. Nothing but rocks, sagebrush, and hard dirt. The most worthless section of the entire property. Plus, and I quote, all contents of grandfather's old barn. The barn was a wreck. Half collapsed, filled with rusted equipment and bird droppings. I'd helped my grandfather in there as a kid, but nobody had used it in 30 years. The roof leaked. The doors hung crooked. That was my inheritance. Garbage land and a garbage barn. But there was a condition. Richard explained it slowly, carefully, like he was talking to a child. To accept the north parcel, I had to sign a complete waiver of any claims to the main estate. No contest. No legal challenges. No questions. Sign now or get nothing. Take it or leave it. The choice was mine. He slid the papers across the desk. Smiled that oily smile. They'd planned this. Lydia and her boys and their pet lawyer. They'd squeeze my father until he changed the will. Probably promised to take good care of him. Probably made it sound reasonable. And now they were offering me scraps and acting like it was generous. Brad couldn't help himself. He laughed. Not quietly either. A full bark of amusement. Chad joined in. They looked at each other and just lost it. Two grown men laughing like hyenas at a funeral. Brad recovered first. He raised his glass of expensive whiskey. Explained their plans to my father's ranch. Their vision. An elite golf resort called the Oasis. Luxury clubhouse. Imported palm trees. Artificial lakes. The works. Memberships starting at $50,000 a year. Investors lined up. Grand opening in 6 months. Then he looked at me, still grinning, still holding that glass. Made his offer. Said I could open a rock farm on my worthless dirt. Maybe sell gravel. Or, and this part made Chad laugh, so hard he snorted, I could work for them. They'd need someone to clean the pool. Skim off the sand and dust. $15 an hour. My level, he said, something appropriate for my skill set. They clinked their glasses together. Drank. Celebrated. Lydia watched with a satisfied smile. Like watching her boys torture me was better than Christmas. Nobody offered me water. Not even that. The rage should have come then. That's what they expected. An outburst. Yelling. Maybe I'd flip the desk or take a swing at Brad's smug face. That's what they wanted. Drama they could use against me later. Proof I was unstable. Proof the will was justified. But my grandfather's voice was louder than theirs. Fools build on sand. Wise men watch where the water flows. I picked up the pen. Richard's eyebrows went up. Just a fraction. Like he expected more fight. I read through the waiver. Standard legal language. I hereby forfeit all claims, present and future, to the Silver Springs Ranch and associated properties in exchange for receiving the North Parcel and associated structures. I signed it, dated it, slid it back across the desk. The room went quiet. They hadn't expected it to be that easy. Brad's smile faltered, just for a second, like maybe he'd wanted to fight after all. Like maybe easy victory tasted worse than he'd imagined. Richard recovered quickly, pulled out another set of papers. The deed to the North Parcel, the keys to grandfather's barn. He pushed them toward me like he was handing over a bag of trash. Muttered something about having everything recorded by end of business tomorrow. I took the keys. Heavy old brass things, worn smooth from decades of use. I remember my grandfather's hands holding these same keys. Remembered him telling me stories in that barn, teaching me about water, about patience, about reading the land. Lydia spoke for the first time since the reading started. Asked if I needed help moving my things. Said it so sweetly. Such fake concern. Such obvious pleasure in my supposed humiliation. I told her I'd be out by morning. Brad made another joke about the rock farm. Chad suggested I should start a YouTube channel. Failed dreams in the desert. They thought that was hilarious. Richard even chuckled a little, trying to stay in good with his paying clients. I stood up, thanked Richard for his time, turned to leave. Richard stopped me. His voice took on that official lawyer tone. Said he had to emphasize something for the record. Once the ink dried on these papers, I would be a stranger on this property. I couldn't even fill a water bottle from the kitchen tap without Lydia's permission. This was a complete and total severance. Did I understand? I understood perfectly. Lydia called after me, said my father would have wanted me to be practical, to accept reality, to understand that some people were meant for bigger things and others for smaller. She probably believed that. Probably slept fine at night, thinking she'd done everyone a favor. I walked out of that library, through the marble foyer with its chandelier, past the abstract art that looked like a toddler's accident. The cold air gave way to desert heat at the door. It felt like coming home, like shedding a coat you never wanted to wear. My Ford F-250 sat in the circular driveway, 2005 model, diesel, 290,000 miles on it. Ran better than the day I bought it, because I maintained it myself. Changed the oil every 5,000 miles. Kept the fuel system clean. Replaced parts before they failed. It was scarred and dented and sun-faded, but it was mine. Paid off. Reliable. I climbed into the cab. The engine turned over with that reliable diesel clatter. I sat there for a moment, windows down, engine running, looking at the house in my rear-view mirror. Through the library window, I could see them, Lydia and her boys, still in there, probably planning their resort, drawing up budgets, counting money they hadn't earned, celebrating a victory they didn't understand. They thought they'd won, thought they'd played me, thought 500 acres of rocks was punishment disguised as inheritance. They'd given me garbage and laughed while they did it. I put the truck in gear. The gravel crunched under my tires. I drove through the ranch gates, watched them shrink in my mirror. The house, the party lights coming on, the celebration of fools who just handed me everything I needed. The road north was dark, no streetlights out here, just my headlights cutting through the desert night and the stars overhead, more stars than you ever see in cities. The Milky Way spread across the sky like spilled milk, beautiful, honest, no pretense. The drive took 40 minutes. The paved road gave way to graded dirt, then to 2 tracks barely visible in the dust. My truck handled it fine, built for this. The engine's steady diesel rumble was the only sound besides whine through the open windows. The North Parcel sat at the edge of the property, the forgotten corner. I'd been out here twice as a kid, helped my grandfather with something he never quite explained. Just watched him work, watched him take measurements, watched him nod to himself like the land was confirming something he already knew. My headlights found the barn first. The structure leaned hard to the left, with gray as bone. Tumbleweeds piled against the north wall, like they were trying to push it over the rest of the way. One of the doors hung at an angle. The other was missing entirely. I killed the engine. The silence rushed in. Complete desert quiet. No air conditioning hum. No party music. No ice clinking in expensive glasses. Just wind and the tick of my cooling engine and the vast, empty patience of the high desert night. The keys were heavy in my hand, brass worn smooth from decades of use. I remember my grandfather's callous fingers holding these same keys, teaching me things, telling me to pay attention, to remember. The barn door fought me, swollen from 30 years of moisture cycles. When it finally gave, the smell hit me, dust and motor oil and time, old wood and leather and something else. Memory, maybe, the particular scent of a place that hasn't been disturbed in decades. My phone's flashlight cut through the darkness. The beam picked out details. My grandfather's workbench against the far wall, tools still hanging on pegboards, organized, labeled in his careful handwriting, everything in its place. A calendar from 1994, still tacked to a support beam. Time had stopped here. I walked to the back corner. My light found what I was looking for under a canvas tarp so thick, with dust, it looked like felt. I pulled the tarp away. It came off in a cloud that made me cough. Underneath sat my grandfather's old metal toolbox. Army surplus. Heavy gauge steel. Painted olive drab, but worn down to bare metal in places. The box was locked. The smallest key on the ring fit perfectly. The lock resisted. Rust. I worked it gently. Patient. Finally heard the click. Inside were his papers. His maps. His engineering notebooks filled with his precise technical drawings. Everything he'd taught me. Everything he'd learned in 50 years of reading this land. Everything he'd carefully documented about where the water really was. About the old rights. About who got what and when and why. I didn't need to read them. Not yet. I already knew what they'd say. He'd told me, made me memorize it, made me understand it, just never told me why it mattered so much. Now I knew why. I closed the box, locked it, carried it out to my truck, and set it carefully in the bed. The weight of it felt right. Felt like inheritance should feel. Not money, not property, knowledge, power. The kind that comes from understanding how things really work. The desert night pressing around me. Cool now. The temperature dropping fast the way it does when there's no moisture to hold the heat. I stood there in the darkness between my truck and this half-collapsed barn on 500 acres of rocks and dust that everyone thought was worthless. My grandfather used to say something I hadn't thought about in years. He'd say it when he caught me getting angry at unfair things, when I'd rage about injustice or stupidity or people getting away with things they shouldn't. He'd put his hand on my shoulder, wait for me to calm down. Then he'd tell me that revenge was a dish best served cold. But justice? Justice was different. Justice didn't care about temperature. Justice flowed like water. Patient. Inevitable. You could dam it up for a while. You could redirect it. You could pretend it wasn't there. But eventually, gravity won. Eventually, everything flowed where it was supposed to flow. I looked south toward the main ranch. Couldn't see it from here. Too far. Too dark. But I knew it was there. Knew they were still celebrating. Still counting their money. Still planning their resort. Still thinking they'd won. The north parcel waited around me. 500 acres of rocks and dirt and sagebrush. 500 acres of possibility. They couldn't see because they'd never learned to look past the surface. Never learned that the desert doesn't lie. Never learned where water flows when no one's watching. They'd given me garbage. They'd given me nothing. They'd given me everything. I climbed back into my truck. Started the engine. Tomorrow I had work to do. Papers to read. Plans to make. A future to build from the bones of the past. But tonight, I just sat there. Engine idling. Windows down. Breathing desert air. And looking at stars that didn't care about inheritance or justice or family or money. Just gravity. Just time. Just water flowing where it had always flowed. I drove north toward the only thing that mattered now. I spent the first 3 days just reading. My grandfather's notebooks were meticulous. Every measurement, every calculation, every observation about water flow and seasonal patterns going back to 1948. He documented everything in mechanical pencil. Sharp, precise. The kind of handwriting they don't teach anymore. But the notebooks only told half the story. The other half was buried in the past, in records that predated computers, in documents that couldn't be edited or deleted or lost to a server crash. Paper remembers, my grandfather used to say. Digital forgets. On the fourth day, I drove into town. Carson City, the county seat. The kind of place where government buildings look like they haven't been updated since Eisenhower was president. Brown brick, narrow windows, American flag, hanging limp in the still air. The county records office sat in the basement of the courthouse. Most people use the computers on the main floor. Digital archives. Everything scanned and searchable. Quick, easy, unreliable. I went to the basement. Down 2 flights of stairs that smelled like old concrete and floor wax. The archive room had a particular smell of old paper and dust. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Row after row. Nobody down there but me and a woman named Margaret who'd worked the desk for 30 years. She remembered my grandfather. That got me past the usual questions about what I was looking for and why. I told her I needed water rights documentation, original records, pre-1930. She nodded like this made perfect sense and disappeared into the stacks. 20 minutes later, she came back with a ledger the size of a phone book, leather binding cracked with age, pages yellowed but intact. The spine said Water Appropriations 1918 to 1925 in gold letters that had mostly flaked away. I took it to one of the reading tables. Opened it carefully. The pages crackled. Inside was handwritten documentation of every water claim filed in the county during those years. Names, dates, locations, flow rates, senior rights, junior rights. All of it recorded in careful cursive with fountain pen ink that had turned brown with time. It took me 2 hours to find what I needed. Page 247. Filed March 15th, 1922. Claimant, Robert Harrison. That was my grandfather. Location, North Section, Township 4 North, Range 7 East. Water source, Dry Creek Springs. Priority date, March 15th, 1922. Senior appropriation for irrigation and domestic use, 0.5 cubic feet per second. Below that, on page 251, filed June 3rd, 1925, claimant, Thomas Harrison, my great-grandfather. Location, Silver Springs Ranch Main Section. Water source, Dry Creek Springs. Priority date, June 3rd, 1925. Junior appropriation for agricultural use. 0.3 cubic feet per second, subject to senior rights holder, receiving full allocation first. There it was, written in ink that had survived a century, the kind of documentation that holds up in court because it predates every digital system ever invented. Prior appropriation doctrine, first in time, first in right, Western water law in its purest form. My grandfather's claim was 3 years older than the main ranch claim. The North parcel had senior rights. The Silver Springs Ranch had junior rights. That meant legally, historically, and practically, my worthless rocks got all the water they needed before one drop flowed to Lydia's $25 million resort. I took photos of both pages with my phone. Then I paid Margaret $5 to make certified copies. She used an actual photocopy machine that probably dated to 1987. The copies came out gray and slightly crooked. Perfect. I paid another $20 for official certification stamps. She pressed the county seal into each page with a heavy metal embosser that left raised lettering you could feel with your fingers. I drove back to the North parcel with those documents in a manila folder on my passenger seat. The weight of them felt good, solid, real. The kind of power that doesn't come from money or connections or knowing the right people. The kind that comes from understanding how things actually work underneath all the noise. At the barn, I spread my grandfather's engineering maps across his old workbench. The paper had gone brittle. I weighted the corners with wrenches. The maps showed the original water system from 1922. Not the modern irrigation setup on the main ranch. The old system. The real system. The one built when people understood that water in the desert wasn't a convenience. It was survival. The maps showed a natural spring about 2 miles northwest of my barn. Dry Creek Springs. Except it wasn't dry at all. Never had been. The name was my grandfather's little joke. Call it dry and people leave it alone. The spring fed into a hand-built stone channel that ran southeast. That channel led to a distribution box. From there, water could flow either northeast to the north parcel or southwest to what became the main ranch. The distribution box had a valve. A big one. Cast iron. Manual operation. Whoever controlled that valve controlled the water. I found it on day 6. Took me most of the morning. The channel was buried under 30 years of sagebrush and blown sand. I followed the maps, paced out distances, looked for the slight depression in the ground that suggested something man-made underneath all that natural chaos. The distribution box sat under 3 feet of dirt and dead vegetation. Concrete, reinforced, built to last. The lid was still there, cast concrete 2 inches thick with an iron ring handle. I cleared the debris, pulled the lid. It fought me. Hadn't been opened since probably 1994 based on that calendar in the barn. Inside was the valve assembly. Big wheel, iron pipes, everything coated in mineral deposits and rust, but intact. Functional. My grandfather had built things right. Built them to survive neglect. Built them to wait. The valve was currently set to direct all flow southwest, toward the main ranch. That's where it had been for 3 decades. That's where Lydia assumed it would stay forever. I didn't touch it. Not yet, but I took measurements. Checked the mechanism. Worked the wheel gently to see if it was seized. It moved. Stiff. Reluctant. But it moved. A little WD. 40, and it would turn smooth as silk. Down at the main ranch, I could hear construction noise. Diesel engines. Backup beepers. The sound of expensive machinery moving expensive dirt around to create expensive landscaping that would die the moment water stopped flowing. They were building their dream, the Oasis Resort. I'd seen the signs going up. Glossy. Professional. Membership starting at $50,000 annually. Grand opening in 2 weeks. They were spending money like water, which I guess was appropriate. The architectural plans called for 3 artificial lakes, 18 holes of championship golf, and irrigation systems that would use about 2 million gallons per week during peak summer. Desert landscaping wasn't good enough for Lydia's vision. She wanted Kentucky bluegrass. She wanted palm trees. She wanted a kind of green that makes rich people feel like they've conquered nature. I did the math in my head. 2 million gallons per week. My senior water rights entitled me to 0.5 cubic feet per second. That's about 2.2 million gallons per week. Give or take. The math was almost funny. My legal allocation was more than their entire resort needed. If I took what was mine, they got nothing. Not a drop. Their junior rights only kicked in after I was satisfied. Prior appropriation doesn't care about investment, doesn't care about business plans, doesn't care who spent more money or who has better lawyers. It cares about one thing: who got there first. I needed equipment, not new equipment. The old stuff, the stuff my grandfather had built and maintained. I spent 2 days clearing out the barn, moving rusted tools, sorting what was salvageable from what was scrap. Found his old irrigation gates, found his flow meters, found his maintenance tools. Everything labeled, everything organized, everything exactly where a man would put things if he knew someone might need them someday. The old reservoir was there too. I'd walked past it 3 times before I realized what it was. Just looked like a depression in the ground, maybe 30 yards across. Circular. But when I cleared the sagebrush, I found the concrete edge, 6 inches thick, reinforced with rebar. My grandfather had built this to hold water, built it to last. The inlet pipe was there. The outlet pipe was there. The whole system was intact, just sleeping, waiting for someone who understood it to wake it up. I made a call. Guy named Ray who ran an excavation company out of Fallon. Known him for 15 years. Done hydrology work on his ranch. He owed me a favor from when I'd found a leak in his stock pond that would have cost him $20,000 to fix wrong. I fixed it right for the cost of lunch. Told him I needed some earth moving. Maintenance work on an existing easement. Clearing brush. Reestablishing historic water channels. All legal. All documented. He said he could spare his smaller excavator for 3 days. Asked if I was working on the old Harrison place. I said yes. He got quiet for a moment. Then he said my grandfather was a good man who understood water better than anyone he'd ever met. He'd send his best operator. The excavator showed up on day 8. Compact machine. Kubota. Perfect for this kind of detailed work. The operator was a kid, maybe 25, who knew his equipment. I showed him the maps. Showed him what needed clearing. Explained we were restoring existing infrastructure, not building new. He understood immediately. This was maintenance. Historic preservation. The kind of work that doesn't need new permits because we were just bringing old systems back to their original condition. He worked for 2 days. Careful. Precise. Cleared the channel from the distribution box to my reservoir. Cleaned out the reservoir itself. Removed 30 years of blown sand and dead vegetation. By the time he finished, you could see what my grandfather had built, could see the engineering, the thoughtfulness, the understanding that water in the desert was precious and systems that moved it needed to be simple, durable, and reparable. The kid refused payment for the second day. Said it was an honor to work on something built that well. Said they don't make things like this anymore. He was right. They don't. Modern systems are plastic and electronics, and parts that fail in 5 years. My grandfather's system was stone and concrete and iron, parts that fail in 5 generations. While the excavator worked, I handled the valve, took it apart, cleaned it. The threads were still good. The seals had rotted, but I had replacements. Standard sizes. The kind of parts you can still get because good engineering uses standard parts. I replaced what needed replacing, oiled what needed oil, greased what needed grease, worked the mechanism until it turned smooth and predictable. When I was done, that valve was ready to do exactly what it was built to do 100 years ago. Direct water where it needed to go. No computers, no electronics, no Wi-Fi connection, just metal and leverage in physics. The kind of technology that works in a grid-down situation. The kind that works forever if you maintain it. I needed to test it. Made sense to be sure everything worked before committing. I cracked the valve open. Just a fraction. Maybe 10% flow. Not enough to drop pressure downstream significantly. Not enough for anyone at the main ranch to notice. But enough to start filling my reservoir. Let it run for 2 days while I watch for leaks. Check the seals. Made sure 30 years of sitting dormant hadn't compromised anything structural. The water came clear and cold. Spring water. The kind that tastes like minerals and stone. The reservoir filled slowly. Steadily. By day 10 it was holding water perfectly. No leaks. No problems. The old concrete had done its job. I didn't close the valve completely after testing. Left it cracked just a hair. A trickle. Enough to keep the water oxygenated and cool for the fish I'd be stocking, but not enough to register on the main ranch's flow meters. Just legitimate line loss. The kind of seepage every system has. Nobody questions it because it's expected. I also made another call. Nevada Department of Wildlife. Asked about stocking Lahontan cutthroat trout. Endangered species. Native to this watershed. I explained I was restoring a historic reservoir. Had clean spring water, wanted to establish a conservation population. They were excited. Not often someone volunteers to help an endangered species. They came out, tested my water. Perfect pH, perfect temperature, perfect mineralization. Exactly what these fish needed. They brought juveniles in aerated tanks. Helped me release them. Gave me documentation that this was now a protected habitat. That documentation was insurance. Federal protection. Anyone who messed with my water system was now potentially interfering with endangered species habitat. That's not a civil matter. That's federal. That's serious time. On day 12, Brad and Chad drove past. I was working on the valve assembly, greasing the main wheel. They had a new Mercedes G-Wagon. Matte black, probably $80,000 of German engineering, designed to go off-road, but usually just parked at Whole Foods. They saw my truck, saw me, stopped. They got out laughing, both wearing expensive sunglasses, both in clothes that cost more than my monthly mortgage. Chad had a vape pen. Brad had an energy drink that probably cost $8. Brad wanted to know what I was doing. Playing in the mud, he said. They just order marble from Carrara. Italian. The real stuff. Cost more to ship than most people make in a year. Their golf course was taking shape. Their clubhouse was framed. Their future was bright. Chad asked if I found anything out here besides rocks. Maybe a dead coyote. They both thought that was hilarious. I was kneeling by the valve assembly, hands covered in grease. I wiped them on a rag, looked up at them standing there in their expensive outfits in the desert sun, soft, unprepared, the kind of people who think money solves physics. Told them I was just maintaining infrastructure, cleaning pipes, getting ready for the heat. They should do the same. Summer was coming. Going to be a hot one. Brad said something about how their resort had backup systems, redundancies, state-of-the-art everything. Chad mentioned their water storage tanks, 10,000 gallons, industrial filtration, the best money could buy. I nodded, didn't argue, let them feel smart. My grandfather used to say that the best time to correct someone is never. Let their mistakes teach them. More effective that way, more permanent. They left in a spray of gravel and dust, drove back to their construction site, back to their marble and their vision and their absolute certainty that they'd won. I went back to work. The valve mechanism needed more adjustment. The spring-loaded return needed lubrication. I worked in the desert silence. The only sound were tools on metal and wind through sagebrush and the distant diesel rumble of their construction equipment burning through their investors' money. By day 14, everything was ready. The channel was clear. The reservoir was clean. The valve was perfect. The fish were establishing themselves. The legal documentation was secured. Every piece was in place. Nothing to do now but wait. I drove into town that evening. Stopped at the same diner where I always stopped. Maria's. Been there 40 years. Still has vinyl booths and coffee in ceramic mugs. Real food. Honest prices. I ordered the meatloaf. Read the local paper while I ate. Weather forecast said record heat coming. Triple digits for the next 2 weeks. Possible all-time records. The kind of heat that stresses every water system. The kind that shows you where the weak points are, where the planning failed, where the assumptions were wrong. Perfect timing. Their grand opening was scheduled for the first Saturday of the heat wave. They'd sent out invitations. Fancy cardstock. Gold embossing. 500 guests. Local politicians. Potential investors. Press coverage. The works. Their moment of triumph. Their proof that vision and money could reshape reality. I drove back to my barn as the sun set. The temperature was already climbing. You could feel it. The air had that particular weight that comes before extreme heat, that sense of the atmosphere pressing down, holding its breath. I checked the valve one last time, operated it through its full range of motion. Smooth, reliable, ready. Check the fish. They were adapting well. Check the channel. Clear. Check the legal documents. Secured in a fireproof safe in my truck. Everything ready. Everything legal. Everything justified by a century of water law and engineering, and understanding how the desert really works. Tomorrow was Friday, day before the grand opening. Day before 500 people in expensive clothes stood around artificial lakes in record heat and celebrated conquering nature. I sat on the tailgate of my truck, drank a beer, watched the stars come out. Desert stars. Honest stars. The kind that don't care about money or plans or people who think they're special. My grandfather's words came back. The ones he'd said when I was young and angry about something unfair. When I wanted immediate justice. Immediate revenge. He'd told me that water doesn't rush. Water waits. Water finds a path of least resistance and follows it with absolute patience. And when water finally moves, nothing stops it. Not money, not power, not wishful thinking. Just gravity, just time, just the oldest laws there are. I finished my beer, went inside the barn, set my alarm for dawn. Tomorrow I'd make one phone call, one official notification. Then I'd turn one wheel, one simple mechanical action, and watch gravity do what gravity does. The desert night settled in. Hot, still, waiting, just like me. Saturday morning came in hot, the kind of heat that starts before sunrise, the kind where the thermometer hits 90 by 8 a.m. and just keeps climbing. Weather Service had issued warnings. Excessive heat advisory. Stay indoors. Drink water. Check on elderly neighbors. The desert was doing what it does. Testing everything. Finding the weak points. I was up at 5. Made coffee. Checked the valve one last time. Everything ready. Everything legal. Everything documented. The reservoir was full. The fish were healthy. The paperwork was in order. I had one phone call to make. One simple notification. Then one turn of a wheel. The grand opening was scheduled for 11 a.m. They'd planned it for late morning to give people time to arrive. Time to park their expensive cars. Time to grab champagne and canapes before the noon ceremony. Lydia had planned every detail. The stage, the ribbon cutting, the speeches about vision and progress and transforming the desert into paradise. I drove to the distribution box at 10:30. Took my time. No rush. Gravity doesn't hurry. Neither did I. The valve wheel was exactly where I'd left it. Freshly greased. Tested. Ready. I stood there for a moment. Felt the heat pressing down. Felt the weight of what came next. Not revenge. Justice. There's a difference. Revenge is personal. Emotional. Hot. Justice is patient. Procedural. Cold as spring water. At 11:45, I made the call. County Water Commissioner's office. Got the duty officer. Told him my name. Told him I was activating my senior water rights under the 1922 appropriation. Gave him the file numbers. The legal descriptions. Everything by the book. He asked if I was sure. I said I was. He said he'd make note of it in the official record. Timestamp. 11:47 a.m. I thanked him. Hung up. Then I grabbed that wheel. Big thing. Cast iron. Took 2 hands. Started turning. It fought me at first. Even with fresh grease, 100 years of gravity had settled into those threads. But it moved. Slow. Steady. Quarter turn. Half turn. 3/4. The resistance changed. I heard it before I saw it. A deep gurgling sound underground. Water finding a new path. Following new instructions. Going where physics and law said it should go. I kept turning. Full rotation. 2 rotations. 3. The flow changed completely. I could hear my reservoir filling. The sound of water hitting water. The sound of a system coming alive after sleeping for 30 years. The sound of justice following the path of least resistance. Down at the resort, they had no idea. Not yet. Takes time for water to stop flowing. Takes time for pressure to drop. Takes time for reality to catch up with their assumptions. I walked to my truck, got my thermos of coffee, sat on the tailgate, waited. The sun was almost directly overhead now. Had to be 105, maybe 108. The kind of heat that makes the horizon shimmer, makes distance uncertain, makes the whole world feel like it's vibrating. 11:58, 11:59, noon. I couldn't see the resort from where I sat. Too far, wrong angle, but I could imagine it. The stage with its white fabric canopy. The guests in their summer cocktail attire already sweating through their deodorant. The champagne getting warm. Lydia at the microphone. Brad and Chad flanking her like bookends. All of them about to toast their vision, their success, their conquest of nature. The water would hit the fountain first. The big decorative centerpiece. Italian marble. Cost probably $250,000. Needed constant pressure to shoot water 20 feet in the air. Needed flow. Needed what they didn't have anymore. My phone rang at 12:04. Unknown number. I let it ring. It stopped, started again immediately. I answered. It was screaming, not words at first, just rage. Then words. Lydia, demanding to know what I'd done, accusing me of sabotage, of terrorism, of destroying her dreams. I waited until she ran out of breath, asked if she was finished. She called me things I won't repeat. I told her to check the county water records, check the 1922 appropriation, check with her lawyer. Then I hung up. The phone rang again. I turned it off, put it in my glove box, poured myself more coffee. 20 minutes later, I heard vehicles, multiple engines, coming fast. The sound of expensive machinery being driven hard over bad roads. They were coming to me. Of course they were. When rich people's plans fail, they look for someone to blame, someone to punish, someone to make feel their pain. 3 vehicles, the G-Wagon, a BMW SUV, and a Sheriff's Department Explorer. They stopped in a cloud of dust about 50 yards from where I sat. Doors opened. People got out. Lydia led the charge. She'd changed out of whatever fancy outfit she'd worn for the opening. Now she was in casual, expensive clothes, linen pants, designer sunglasses, face red from heat and rage. Brad and Chad were right behind her. Both looked like they wanted blood. Brad's fists were clenched. Chad was filming with his phone. Of course he was. Everything's content. Behind him came Sheriff Miller. Big guy, maybe 60. Wore the uniform like it was part of his skin. Known him 15 years. Good man. Fair. The kind who cares about law more than politics. He looked tired, like he'd been enjoying his Saturday until he got a call from the richest woman in the county demanding he arrest someone. Lydia didn't wait for introductions. Started yelling as soon as she was in range. I'd stolen their water. I'd sabotaged their opening. I'd destroyed their business. I'd committed crimes. I needed to be arrested. Right now. Immediately. She wanted to see me in handcuffs. Brad moved toward me. Sheriff Miller stepped in front of him, told him to stay put. Brad argued. Sheriff Miller put his hand on his belt, not threatening, just ready. Brad stopped moving. I stayed sitting on my tailgate, didn't stand, didn't react, just sipped my coffee and waited for performance to end. Sheriff Miller walked over to me, asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. Asked if I'd done something to their water. I said I'd activated my legal water rights. He asked if I had documentation. I said I did. I went to my truck cab, got the folder, the certified copies from the county archive, the water appropriation from 1922, the legal descriptions, the priority dates, everything Margaret had stamped and sealed. I handed it to Sheriff Miller. He read it, took his time, flipped back and forth between pages, checked the dates, checked the seals. Lydia kept yelling. He ignored her. Finally, he pulled out his phone, called someone, put on speaker. The voice that answered identified itself as the Nevada State Water Authority, Division of Water Resources. Sheriff Miller explained the situation, read the file numbers, asked for confirmation. The voice said, "Hold on." Keyboard sounds. A minute passed. Lydia was vibrating with impatience. Then the voice came back. Confirmed. Harrison, Robert. Filed March 15th, 1922. Senior appropriation. 0.5 cubic feet per second. Priority over all subsequent claims on Dry Creek Springs. Currently held by Harrison, Jack. Transferred via inheritance. Legal and binding. The voice asked if there was a dispute. Sheriff Miller said there was a complaint about water theft. The voice asked who was complaining. Sheriff Miller said the Silver Springs ranch owners. The voice made a sound like a bitter laugh. Said they held junior rights dated 1925. Junior rights receive allocation only after senior rights are fully satisfied. If the senior rights holder takes their full allocation, junior rights holders receive nothing. That's how prior appropriation works. First in time, first in right. That's the law. Sheriff Miller asked about interference. The voice asked what he meant. Sheriff Miller explained that the junior rights holders were present and seemed upset. The voice said upset doesn't matter. Legal is legal. Then the voice added something else. Said there was a notation on the file. Federal protection. Endangered species habitat. Lahontan cutthroat trout. Anyone who interferes with a water system or habitat faces federal charges. That's not county jurisdiction. That's Fish and Wildlife Service. That's federal court. That's serious time. Sheriff Miller thanked him, hung up, looked at Lydia. He told her it was legal. Everything Jack had done was legal. The water rights were legitimate. The priority was clear. She had no case, no grounds, no complaint. He handed my documents back to me, told me to keep them safe. Lydia lost it. Started screaming about lawyers, about lawsuits, about how her husband had owned this ranch for 40 years, about how she'd invested millions, about how this couldn't be legal, about how someone had to do something. Sheriff Miller let her wind down. Then he told her the law doesn't care about investments, doesn't care about business plans, doesn't care about who spent what. The law cares about documentation, about dates, about who got there first. Her husband's ranch had junior rights. Jack had senior rights. End of story. Brad tried again. Said this was clearly malicious. Said I was doing this to hurt them. Said intent matters. Sheriff Miller asked if I'd violated any laws. Brad said no, but. Sheriff Miller said there's no but. Legal is legal. Malicious isn't a crime if you're operating within your rights. Chad was still filming. Sheriff Miller told him to put the phone away. Chad said he had First Amendment rights. Sheriff Miller said he also had the right to leave private property when told. This was Jack's land. They were trespassing. They needed to go. Lydia tried one more angle. Asked what she was supposed to do. Her resort needed water. Her guests were waiting. Her investors were watching. She had obligations. Sheriff Miller said that sounded like a civil matter, not a criminal one. She should consult her attorney, figure out her options, but she couldn't take Jack's water, couldn't touch his systems, couldn't interfere with federal protected habitat. Those were crimes. Everything else was just business. She stared at him, then at me, the rage slowly shifting into something else. Understanding maybe, reality, the comprehension that she'd lost, that all the money and lawyers and connections couldn't change physics, couldn't change law, couldn't change the fact that water flows downhill and priority flows backward through time. Brad said something about this not being over. Sheriff Miller told him it was over, told all of them to get back in their vehicles and leave, told them he didn't want to get another call about harassment or trespassing, told them to handle their business problems like business people, not like spoiled children throwing tantrums. The three of them walked back to their vehicles. Slow, defeated, the G-Wagon started with its expensive purr. The BMW followed. They drove away in a cloud of dust that hung in the still air like a question mark. Sheriff Miller stayed for a moment, told me I'd made some powerful enemies. I said I'd just exercise my legal rights. He said legal and smart aren't always the same thing. I said maybe not, but legal and right sometimes are. He thought about that, nodded, told me to call if they cause problems. Then he got in his Explorer and left. I sat back down on my tailgate. The desert was quiet again, just wind and distance and heat. I could hear my reservoir, water moving, water settling, water being exactly where it was supposed to be. I poured the last of my coffee. It was lukewarm, didn't matter. I wasn't drinking it for the temperature. I was drinking it for the moment, for the satisfaction of watching gravity and law work exactly like they're supposed to work. Patient, inevitable, fair. I got my fishing rod from the truck bed, walked to the reservoir. The water was clear, cool, fed by a spring that had flowed for thousands of years before anyone built ranches or resorts or dreams on top of it. The fish were there. I could see them. Lahontan cutthroat trout, endangered, beautiful, protected. I cast my line, sat on the concrete edge my grandfather had built, felt the sun on my back and the breeze on my face, and the complete absence of guilt or doubt or regret. The weeks that followed were predictable, like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Once the supports are removed, you know what's coming. You just have to wait for physics to do its work. The Oasis Resort tried to open anyway. They had 10,000 gallons in storage tanks. They rationed it, turned off the fountains, limited the bathrooms, told guests there was a temporary technical issue. The golf course lasted 3 days. Kentucky bluegrass in the desert in July with no water. It went brown, then yellow, then dead. Just a $20 million dirt patch with sand traps. The investors noticed, started asking questions, started reviewing contracts, started finding clauses about water rights and due diligence, started discovering that Lydia's lawyers had never actually verified the water situation, had just assumed. Assumptions are expensive. The lawsuit started in week 2. 3 different investment groups, all claiming fraud, all claiming misrepresentation, all demanding their money back. Lydia hired lawyers, good ones, expensive ones. They filed motions, requested delays, argued technicalities, lost anyway. You can't argue away a 1922 water appropriation. The facts are the facts. By week 4, the bank noticed the resort was supposed to be generating revenue, memberships, green fees, restaurant sales. Instead, it was generating bills, maintenance on dead landscaping, legal fees, refunds to angry investors. The business plan had collapsed. The projections were fiction. The collateral was worthless without water. The bank called the loans. All of them. The construction loan, the operating loan, the line of credit secured by the ranch. They wanted their money. Immediately. Lydia didn't have it. She'd spent it. On marble, on landscaping, on her vision, on assuming that water would always flow. Week 6, the foreclosure notice went up. The bank was taking the Silver Springs Ranch. Auction scheduled for 60 days out. Distressed asset sale. Sold as is. No warranties. No guarantees. Especially no guarantees about water. I read about it in the county legal notices. Small print in the back of the newspaper. The kind of notice that ruins lives in 3 paragraphs of legal language. I felt something when I read it. Not quite satisfaction. Not quite pity. Something in between. The recognition that actions have consequences. That reality doesn't negotiate. The auction happened on a Tuesday. County courthouse steps. 10 a.m. About a dozen people showed up. Mostly curious. A few serious bidders. The auctioneer was professional. Described a property. 1,200 acres. Main house. Outbuildings. Equipment. Golf course infrastructure. Then he got to the disclaimer. Water rights are junior and subordinate to senior appropriation dated 1922. Buyer takes subject to all existing easements and limitations. The serious bidders left. You could see the math happening in their heads. Beautiful property. Great location. No guaranteed water. Worthless. Maybe worth something to whoever held those senior rights. But to anyone else? Just expensive dirt. The auctioneer started the bidding at $5 million. No takers. For million. 3, 2, 1. Nothing. He looked frustrated. Conferred with the bank representative. Started over. Dropped the opening bid to $500,000. One bidder raised their hand. Me. The auctioneer looked surprised. Asked if there were other bidders. Silence. He called it once. Twice. Sold to Jack Harrison for $500,000. Less than 2% of what Lydia thought it was worth. Less than the marble cost. Less than the golf course grass. But with my water rights, worth everything. I had the money. Sold a water option to an agricultural operation 60 miles downstream. They needed guaranteed allocation for their crops. I could provide it. 5-year contract. Renewable. $500,000 a year. The math was simple. I had more water than I needed. They needed water. Prior appropriation meant I controlled the flow. Economics did the rest. The closing took 2 weeks. Paperwork. Title transfer. Deed recording. All the bureaucratic machinery that turns ownership from theory to reality. I signed documents. Cut a check. Got keys to my father's house. The house I'd grown up in. The house Lydia had remodeled into something unrecognizable. The house that was mine again. The eviction notice went out the day after closing. Legal requirement, 30 days to vacate. I could have given them more time, could have been generous. But generosity to people who showed no mercy felt like betrayal of everyone they'd ever stepped on. The desert doesn't compromise. Neither did I. I showed up on eviction day. Morning. Early. The sun was just clearing the mountains. The heat hadn't built yet. My F-250 rolled up the driveway. Same truck. Same diesel rumble. But this time I owned the ground under the driveway. They were loading a minivan. Not the G-Wagon. Not the BMW. A rental. Some economy model with a dent in the door. The bank had taken everything with a title and a loan. The Porsche. The Mercedes. The luxury they'd wrapped themselves in like armor. All gone. Repossessed. Redistributed. Returned to reality. Lydia looked older. The procedures and treatments couldn't hide stress. Her hair was different. Simpler. Cheaper. Her clothes were normal. Target maybe. Walmart. The kind of brand she'd spent 8 years avoiding. She saw my truck. Stopped loading. Stared. Brad and Chad were there too. Carrying boxes. Both in jeans and T-shirts. Normal clothes. Working clothes. The finance bro uniforms were gone. The Patagonia vests. The designer sunglasses. The visible wealth. All of it gone. They looked like regular people. Tired. Defeated. Broke. I got out of my truck. Didn't say anything. Just stood there. Let them see me. Let them understand who owned this moment. Chad tried first. His voice was different. Smaller. He said they were family. Said blood mattered. Said they had nowhere to go. Said couldn't I help them? Just for a little while. Just until they got back on their feet. Maybe they could stay in the guest house. They wouldn't be any trouble. I walked to my truck bed. Opened the tailgate. Pulled out a shovel. The same kind of shovel Brad had metaphorically offered me 3 months ago. Cleaned the pool for $15 an hour. That offer. I carried it over. Stood in front of Brad. Looked at his face. Saw the recognition. Saw him remember. I held out the shovel. Told him I needed a new irrigation trench dug. North section. About 200 yards. Hard ground. Rocks. Summer heat. Brutal work. I'd pay $15 an hour. No benefits. Lunch break comes out of pay. If he wanted the job, it was his. If he didn't, I needed him off my property in the next 10 minutes. Brad stared at the shovel. At me. At the shovel. Something in his face crumbled. Not quite tears. Just a complete dissolution of ego. The recognition that he'd lost everything. That his mockery had become his offer. That karma wasn't mystical. It was just consequences wearing a patient face. He didn't take the shovel. Nobody did. They finished loading their minivan. Drove away. Disappeared down the road in a vehicle that probably cost less than the whiskey they'd been drinking 3 months ago. I watched them go. Felt something complicated. Not quite victory. Not quite sympathy. Maybe just a recognition that I'd become what I needed to become. Not cruel. Not kind. Just the natural consequence of their choices. The landing pad their trajectory demanded. I walked into the house. My father's house. My house. It still smelled like Lydia's perfume. Still had her decorations. Her art. Her vision of what wealth looked like. I'd change it. Slowly. Carefully. Bring back the pieces of my father that she'd erased. But not today. Today I just wanted to walk through it. Claim it. Remember it. In the library where the will had been read, I found my father's old photograph. The one of him and my grandfather standing by the original distribution box in 1952. Lydia had stuck it in a drawer. Hidden it. Erased it. I pulled it out. Dusted it off. The two of them standing there in work clothes with their hands on that same valve I'd turned. Both smiling. Both understanding something about water and time and patience. I hung it above the fireplace. Took down Lydia's abstract painting. Leaned it against the wall facing inward. Left it there for the trash. That evening I went out to porch. The big wraparound porch my grandfather had built. My father's favorite spot. I sat in his chair. The wood was smooth from years of use. Comfortable. Right. The sun was setting. The temperature was dropping. The desert evening was coming with its particular magic. That transition from punishing to perfect, from hostile to welcoming. The moment when the land exhales. I could see the fields. The ones my grandfather had irrigated. The ones my father had maintained. The ones Lydia had tried to pave over with her vision. They were dry now, waiting, ready. I walked to the main valve, the one that controlled flow to these fields, the one that had been closed for months while construction happened, while the resort was built, while my family's land was forgotten in favor of someone else's dream. I opened it, turned the wheel, felt the resistance, felt the flow change, heard water moving through pipes, ancient pipes, hand-laid pipes, pipes that had waited patiently for someone who understood to return. The water came slowly at first, then stronger, then steady, flowing into channels, spreading across fields, soaking into ground that remembered what water meant, what life meant, what proper stewardship looked like. I stood there as the light faded, watched the water move, watched the land drink, watched nature and engineering and human understanding work together the way they were supposed to, not fighting, not conquering, just cooperating, just following the rules that existed before we did and will exist after we're gone. My grandfather's words came back, the ones he'd said at the end, when he was old and tired, but still sharp, still understanding. He'd told me the desert teaches one lesson: patience. The desert doesn't care about your schedule, your plans, your vision. It cares about water, about adaptation, about respect. He'd said fools try to conquer the desert. Wise men learn from it. The desert doesn't forgive weakness, doesn't forgive arrogance, doesn't forgive people who think money changes physics. But it rewards patience, rewards understanding, rewards people who watch where water flows and follow instead of fight. I'd followed, watched, waited, let gravity do the work, let time prove the point, let reality teach the lesson I couldn't teach with words. The water flowed across the fields. The desert drank. The evening settled into night. Stars came out. Honest stars. Desert stars. The kind that watched civilizations rise and fall and didn't judge. Just witnessed. Just persisted. Just reminded us that we're temporary and the land is not. I went back inside, made coffee, sat at my father's desk, started making plans. Real plans. Sustainable plans. Plans that worked with water, not against it. Native crops. Drought-resistant landscaping. Systems that could survive without conquering. That could prosper without destroying. The ranch would survive, would thrive, would become what it was supposed to be. Not a monument to someone's ego. Not a testament to wealth. Just a piece of desert used wisely, respected properly, understood deeply. I slept in my father's bed that night, in the room where he'd slept, in the house where he'd lived, the house that was finally, truly mine again. The desert night pressed against the windows, patient, eternal, unforgiving of foolishness, generous to wisdom. The water flowed, the fish swam, the land healed. Justice didn't celebrate. It just restored, set things right, let gravity and time and law do what they were supposed to do. I dreamed of my grandfather, of him standing by the distribution box, teaching me, showing me, trusting me to remember, to understand, to wait for the moment when understanding mattered. I'd waited, I'd understood, I'd remembered. The water flowed where it was supposed to flow, to the one who got there first, to the one who understood, to the one who'd been patient enough to let the desert teach its lessons. First in time, first in right. That's not just law. That's physics. That's gravity. That's the way water flows when you stop fighting and start listening. The desert doesn't lie. It just waits for you to learn the truth.